Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Station 07.1 Podfic. I'm your host, Rin, and this is the continuation of You're on Your Own, Kid by CastleintheAir1989. This is Chapter 11, Writing in My Room. Also, there are no warnings for this chapter, so we're all good. Izuku lounged on his couch, scribbling in his notebook as he watched the hero news. He found himself relieved to get to stay home from school. Even though things had been much better now that Izawa-sensei was his teacher, the other teachers and students still didn't like him. It was nice to have a day where he didn't have to constantly watch his back. Mom had taken the morning off work to take him to the clinic Izawa-sensei had recommended. He felt bad for making her miss work, but she assured him that she didn't want him to worry about it, reminding him she wanted to take care of him. There had been so many times that he'd hidden things from Mom, just so she wouldn't worry about him. It was a relief to finally share a part that burdened, first with Izawa-sensei, then with Mom. He felt much better than he had the night before after being healed. Even though a slight ache of the injuries he'd received lingered, and the fatigue he felt from the healing made him especially glad Mom had insisted he stayed home for the day. He found it far preferable to how things normally were when he got hurt. Instead of hiding injuries and lying to Mom, he finally received treatment from someone who didn't look down on him. He couldn't believe that he had never knew Red Door clinics existed. But it made sense he wouldn't have heard of them, because the only other quirkless person he'd met before today had been the woman who worked at the bookstore near their house, and she was in her 80s. He'd never seen someone his age before, or even close to it. It had been shocking to walk into the clinic and see it being run almost entirely by a quirkless staff, and some of them were young, like their early 20s. Since Japan had the lowest population of quirkless people, there weren't quite enough people to run the clinic, and therefore the staff was supplemented with a few trustworthy quirked people who were used to heal some of the more major injuries. He'd been attended by a quirkless nurse, and had x-rays taken by a quirkless x-ray technician, and even the receptionist was quirkless. He'd never met so many people who were like him in one place. It wasn't until he was seen by the doctor that he even saw someone with a quirk, and that was only because they determined his injuries were serious enough to require the use of a healing quirk. The doctor who attended him had a revert quirk, and she could almost revert patients to the physical state they were in 24 hours ago. She'd explained to him that he should only feel the slightest lingering pain in the place where his injuries had been, but the more damaged his body was, the harder it was to reset it to what it had been in the past 24 hours, and the more likely he would be to experience some lingering effects of his injuries. Izuku sat fascinated as she used her quirk to heal him. Quirks were so rarely used on him in a positive manner, and he relished in the opportunity to observe one being used firsthand without having to worry about someone's ill intentions. He could feel the bruises fading from his hand and ribs, everything knitting back together, though the ghost of his injuries lingered as if his body knew they were supposed to still be there. But the pain was almost completely gone, replaced with a wariness that had settled into his bones, and he had to fight to stay upright. Questions swirled in his mind, and his fingers itched for a notebook to write down his thoughts. Does the quirk have a strict 24-hour reset, or could it be stretched to a longer period with training? Why do I still remember the things that happened in the past 24 hours, even though my body was reset? If I could still feel some of the bruising after only a few cracked ribs, then it was reasonable to assume the quirk wasn't powerful enough to completely revert even more serious injuries. But if it was used strategically, then it could significantly reduce the damage of many serious injuries. I bet it would be useful in an emergency room, or on the scene of a natural disaster, or villain attack when you could guarantee all the injuries fall within the 24 hours. His rambling was interrupted by a yawn, exhaustion hitting him and cutting off his theorizing. Mom laughed. I guess we better get you home. He pulled himself together enough for Mom to help him back to the car. She dropped him at home before heading to work, making sure he was nicely settled on the couch with a glass of water nearby and food in the fridge for when he got hungry. Exhaustion still clinging to him, seeping through his bones and making his limbs feel heavy, he slept most of the morning and some of the afternoon, and only now felt awake enough to even try to pay attention to anything. A knock sounded on his door, and, detangling himself from the blanket that had somehow wrapped itself around his legs as he dozed, he gingerly stood and went to answer it, careful not to jostle his ribs more than necessary. The soreness still lingered, though it was considerably more tolerable now. Twisting the knob, he opened it to reveal Ozawa-sensei standing in front of him. "Sensei, you're here!" he exclaimed, stepping aside to let his teacher in through the door. "Hey, kid," he greeted him, ruffling his hair as he passed by. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better," he smiled brightly. "It hardly hurts at all now." The doctor was so much nicer than the doctors I usually see. Mom still wanted me to stay home and rest for the day, but she says if I get a lot of sleep tonight, I should be able to go back tomorrow. He briefly wondered how Izawa-sensei knew about the Red Door clinics, but got distracted, the line of thought dropping when Sensei held out a stack of papers to him. "I brought you your homework," he said, handing the stack off to Izuku. "Thanks," he accepted the pile of homework. "Did you have any trouble getting it? I hope the other teachers didn't give you too much of a hard time. They don't like to help me catch up when I miss days, and say it's my fault for falling behind by not being there." "Don't worry about it, that's for me to deal with, not you," Izawa-sensei frowned. "If they give you any trouble about this, let me know. I'll take care of it." Sensei didn't answer his question, but Izuku let it slide, his gratitude overriding his worry. "I will," he promised. Settling in at the kitchen table, he spread his homework out in front of him. Deciding to start with math, he began working his way through the worksheet, knitting his brows together as he got to the third problem. He always had trouble with these kinds of problems, but Yasuda-sensei always got angry when he asked for help or for him to explain it again, so lately he'd been trying to teach himself the concepts. Clearly it wasn't working this time. "Something wrong, problem child?" he inquired. "I'm having trouble with this one problem. Do you think you could help?" he asked tentatively. Ozawa-sensei took a seat beside him. "Show me where you're having trouble." Izuku slid his paper between them and told him what he tried to do. Ozawa-sensei looked over Izuku's work, and, pointing where he'd gone wrong, explaining how to work the problem. He began working the problem a second time, marveling at how much more sense it made when Ozawa-sensei was the one teaching him. Maybe it was because he was the only one who bothered to listen to his questions. "I think I get it now," he burst out. "Glad to hear, kid. Let me know if you have any more trouble." "Are you sure? You must have something else more important to do today." Sensei had already brought him his homework, and found him a doctor that would treat his injuries. He didn't need anything more. Guilt pricked him for wasting the man's time. "I meant what I said," Ozawa-sensei raised one eyebrow at him. "Helping you is important too. It's necessary for you to understand the material you're learning. If I can help you with that, I will." "Oh, thanks. All my other teachers thought I'd asked too many questions." He glanced down, cheeks flushing slightly at the admission. Sensei was always so patient with him, even though he kept causing problems. "It's not your fault they don't have the patience to do their jobs properly," he said firmly. "You are not the problem here." A warm feeling spread through Izuku's chest. Ducking his head to hide his flushed cheeks, he returned his attention to his homework. "They never seem to see it that way," he murmured. "They were wrong, kid." Ozawa-sensei patted his shoulder. "You deserve to have people you can count on to listen to you." "Thanks, Sensei." His lips tilted into a smile. "It's nice to have someone who believes me. The other teachers always tried to blame things on me even when it was the other kids starting trouble." Frowning, Sensei crossed his arms. I've been thinking. I don't like that you're constantly a target. It would be best if you could protect yourself when I'm not around. You should consider learning self-defense, he suggested. I can't. No gyms will take me. Toying with his pencil, he glanced up at his teacher. Mom tried to get me into classes, but we couldn't find anywhere that accepted quirkless students. He snorted. That's ridiculous. Quirks have little bearing on the strength or abilities of individuals. They generally don't affect how fast you move or whether or not you can hold your own in a fight. If you put the same effort into it that you do everything else, there's no reason you couldn't learn. I never thought of it like that. Staring at his hands, he bit his lip. But it's not much help since no one will teach me. You know I could train you. He said it casually, as if it were the most logical solution in the world to the problem. His head snapped up to look at Izawa-sensei. Do you really mean it? I wouldn't have offered if I didn't. Thank you, thank you, thank you! He launched himself out of his chair and threw himself at Izawa-sensei, wrapping his arms around his middle in a tight hug. He let out a huff as Izuku collided with him, but reciprocated in curling his arm around him. No problem, kid. You should probably check with your mom first. I will. He nodded in agreement, excitement bubbling up in his chest. He couldn't wait to learn. This was something he'd wanted for a long time, for someone to finally give him a chance. It might even help you to get into one of the hero schools. You really think so? Izuku asked, detaching himself from his teacher. Yes, you'd be surprised how many people focus on their quirks and don't even bother learning to properly throw a punch. Thanks, sensei, he murmured. You're my favorite teacher. Izuku pretended not to see the flush of his teacher's cheeks at the compliment, but Izuku didn't regret what he said. Ozawa-sensei was so nice, and he deserved to be told. He turned his back to his homework, but his attention remained elsewhere. Sensei's going to train me. He smiled to himself as he answered the next problem. Inko walked into her kitchen to find Izuku hunched over his homework at the kitchen table with Shota, his teacher carefully explaining something as Izuku nodded. They were adorable. A part of her longed to take a picture of the moment, but she resisted, not wanting to embarrass either of them. She already owed Izawa enough as it was. She could never fully express her gratitude for his help. After everything that Nezu was doing for them, to finally have a teacher who was willing to help her son seemed like more than she could have asked for. She had suspected for a while that things were getting worse at school, despite Izuku's numerous attempts to brush off her concerns. He couldn't fully hide the hastily brushed away tears or the way his smile seemed hollow some days. The horror she felt upon being informed that there were bullies who targeted Izuku, bullies who tormented him and continued to prey upon him even outside of school without a single complaint uttered by him, was matched only by her guilt. That was worse than the blatant favoritism the teacher showed some students over others. The derogatory comments they whispered in her and Izuku's direction during the parent-teacher conferences, or the way they seemed to put down Izuku any chance they got. All of that was horrible, but knowing that it had escalated to such frequent physical violence made her feel sick inside. Was it her fault for insisting that they report the incidents at the school? Had she pushed it to this? Or had it always been this bad, and had Izuku just never mentioned it? Had he believed that he couldn't tell her when things got bad? Did her son not know that she would do anything for him? She didn't care that her job had been threatened. He would always be her first priority. It broke her heart that she couldn't have prevented this. If Izawa hadn't been there, she couldn't think like that. Everything had turned out fine this time, thanks to Izuku's wonderful new teacher, but she couldn't shake that sick feeling inside that she should have done something to stop it before it happened. There was no use dwelling on what could have been. She worried too much, and she knew Izuku did too. He probably got it from her. She let herself enjoy the moment, smiling contently as she watched them. Izuku hadn't had a father figure in his life for so long. It was nice he had the support he did now. He had had a little trouble convincing the teachers to give him the assignments for Midoriya. It seemed like not a moment went by that they weren't actively sabotaging him. In the end, Shota had leveled his most terrifying glare at them, demanding they hand over his students' work. He had been relieved not to see him at school. He half expected Midori to show up anyway, broken ribs and all. It would be just like the kid to be so persistent despite whatever trials or discouragement people threw at him. They'd beaten him down consistently, taught him he could trust no one, made him believe he was worth nothing. But, even in the face of this adversity, he still took the risk and put his faith in Shota. The least he could do was offer to train the kid. He could start by teaching him self-defense, adding in martial arts as soon as Midoriya was ready, which he didn't anticipate would take long. He'd even prepare him for the hero course. It made sense to get an early start on training if he was serious about becoming a hero. Inko had agreed right away, tearfully thanking him for his offer. He adores you. He clearly trusts you enough to come to you when he's in trouble. Well, it looked like Hisashi might be right. He'd never been anyone's favorite teacher before, as students were usually too frightened or intimidated by him. But Midoriya, for some reason, wasn't as scared of him anymore. His phone vibrated in his pocket as he walked out of Midoriya's apartment. Pulling it out, he saw it was a message from Nezu. "It's time. Briefing meeting in 1 hour." He smiled. It was about time. He was ready to tear that whole school to the ground. He pushed down the rage bubbling up inside him, typing out a quick reply to let Nezu know he'd be there. He walked into the UA conference room 48 minutes later, taking a seat at the table beside Nezu. He was relieved to see Sakauchi sitting on the rodent's other side. He didn't normally like working with police officers, but he found the detective to be slightly more tolerable than the majority of his profession. The other spots were being gradually filled in with some police officers he didn't recognize. "Azawa, punctual as always," Nezu greeted him. "Now that everyone's here, we may as well begin. As many of you know, Eraserhead spent the last few weeks undercover at Eldora Middle School. During his time there, he uncovered many cases of quirk discrimination and abuse by teachers. After collecting evidence and compiling a list of the offending persons, we are ready to make our arrests, which is why you are all here right now." Turning to Sakauchi, he said, "Detective Sakauchi will explain our plan." Nodding, he spoke. "We are here to offer police support to Eraserhead as he makes his arrests tomorrow. We received the warrants and will make the arrests first thing next morning. I can also offer UA's teachers as support if you believe you'll need more heroes," Nezu suggested. "That won't be necessary," Shota asserted. "Those at Eldora shouldn't be difficult to apprehend. The other heroes would be better utilized elsewhere. From what I've seen, they seem reluctant to target anyone stronger than themselves, focusing mainly on tormenting the students they perceive as weaker. I don't see them providing much resistance." Sakauchi passed some folders around the table. "Before you are the lists of suspects to arrest." Everyone flipped open the packets, aside from Shota, who'd been the one to put the report together and knew it like the back of his hand. "Eraserhead will let you know what you need to anticipate." Shota gave everyone a rundown on the teachers, explaining what they could expect the next day. He finished, and everyone began trickling out of the room. He stood to go, but Nezu caught him before he could leave. He shook his head, turning his attention back to Nezu. "Was that all? I'm sure you didn't pull me aside just to thank me." Nezu beamed at him. "You're as astute as ever. I did have something more I wanted to speak to you about. It's about the identity of your informant." Shota paused. "You discovered who it is?" "I did indeed. I believe you may have reason to know this person. Does the name Midoriya Inko mean anything to you? Shota could only stare at him. What? Midoriya Inko? You mean Midoriya's mother is the one who tipped us off? Why, yes, Nezu confirmed. Shota knew better than to question Nezu's finding, but he still felt like he was reeling from shock from the discovery. You can't tell Midoriya, of course, Nezu reminded him. Of course, he agreed. He knew better than to risk compromising the investigation, and besides, it wasn't his place to reveal his mother's secret. I assume this discovery is why we were able to proceed with the arrest? Yes, Nezu nodded. I asked Midoriya-san if she'd be willing to testify, and she was quite agreeable. Shota studied his face. He had a feeling Nezu must have done quite the convincing to persuade Inko that they could actually be trusted. He'd seen firsthand the wariness Midoriya had towards anyone who even tried to touch on the subject of what was going on in the school, and he still had bruises from Inko's rather protective nature. Good. The sooner everyone is behind bars, the better. I feel the same way, Nezu agreed. I expect good news first thing tomorrow morning. Shota nodded and took his leave. He felt an anxious thrum of energy in his veins in anticipation of tomorrow. And that is the end of Chapter 11. I hope you guys enjoyed, and don't forget to tune in next time for the last chapter. This was Station 07.1 Podfic.